Okay, the recording has started. So even though it's going to be a little redundant, some of you are going to forget that render stuff. So I'm going to show you really quick again while I'm recording. You know what? I'm going to stop recording just for a second. No, let's go ahead and record this. This will make sense because you'll be curious again later. Where do I find that thing, right? So before I start showing this again, I want to be able to get this onto your screen, okay? This may be something that you find helpful as well. So kind of watch along up here. Up here, ETSU E3 server again, right? I'm going to go all the way back to DIGM classes. Remember, so there's ETSU E3, DIGM classes, and then Greg. And then just under my name folder, there's a file in here called WebEx, right? So you can either double click on that file and it'll open it up in Microsoft Edge, or you can drag that into Chrome and it'll give you the opportunity to log into my room, okay? And so that's really like a sort of like a web conference or a webinar room, okay? So let me go ahead and be getting that room set up really quick. So it will probably ask you to install something. That's okay. Just go ahead and hit yeah. What it's asking you to install is it's like a little applet that goes along with your browser. And as soon as I get mine working here, what should show up once you've logged in, you can make up whatever username, password you want to. It doesn't really matter. What's happening? Oh yeah, so it's creating my personal room. And this is how we could actually have class if I weren't here. Let's say I get mono or something like that, and we can't fall behind or whatever. This is how I can share stuff. We could have like literally a chat room set up, or I can share things through here, including my screen. So I'm going to go ahead and share, I guess it's screen one. Nope. Where did it go? It's this one right here. I'm going to go ahead and share this screen, okay? And so now that means that when you log in, you should be able to see what's on my screen, okay? That'll be in a browser, so you can resize that or put that wherever you want to. So I'll walk around and help you out with this. I think that's just if we were in a different section and we wanted to like have a conversation, like over the phone. Yeah. So the question was if you copy that to your hard drive, that WebEx link, you can't access it from home. So let's say someday you're sick, you can't make it to class or whatever, you need to use that. You can follow along in class. And I'm going to try that every day where I'm going to be lecturing, where I'm going to be like walking you through stuff, I will try to remember to pop that up. If for some reason I get in a hurry and I forget, stop me. Be like, Greg, can you turn on the WebEx? And I'll do that. It becomes really handy for some people. Some people don't like it at all. Like they're just like, nah, I don't need that. You learn how is best for you to learn. Anybody having issues getting that up? You just go and close that. That's like if you were somewhere else and it was. So a couple people are getting that error about the audio. That only would matter if we were in a different location and you needed to be able to ask questions through WebEx. It's basically looking for a microphone and not finding it. Okay, that should work. It doesn't actually check his email or not. So you just type out your name, email address, and it'll ask you to install. up this screen real estate thing. We're having a meeting Friday. I'm going to bring that up. Like, else having any problems getting it to work? So it should let you log into that even if I've not started the room yet. So there's a good chance some of you will beat me to class every day because I somehow fell behind back in 1998 and I have not caught up yet. So I'm perpetually 10 minutes late for everything. I actually think that works pretty well on an 8:15 because you're inevitably going to hit snooze one too many times and be running a little late too. So usually if we can get class going, 10, 15 minutes after 8:15. If we're going by 8:30, I feel like that's pretty good. Right? I'm okay with that. So this, you should be able to see what's on my screen right now. What you'll notice is there's probably going to be a touch of lag. This is, as inconvenient as this seems, this is like sending this out to the internet and then you're pulling it back down from the internet again, right? It's not like I'm sending it straight to your computer. And so that means that depending on the internet speed, how this updates on your screen may not be as smooth as it's updating up here, right? That means it gets a little laggy when we start doing animation stuff, and like it may drop a frame or two, and it may not play back as smooth as it would be playing up on the screen. So occasionally you'll still have to look up at the screen. The videos hopefully will be capturing it at real time, though, so we should be okay there. All right. So I just want to start asking questions here because you've spent almost the last week working on this. Just complete honesty. How many of you put it off until last night? Anybody? All right, there we are. But you got it done, right? There will be projects you can't put off until the last night. How many of you were working on it before class was over on Wednesday? Anybody? Yeah. How many of you enjoyed it? How many of you found it extremely frustrating? Okay. So, it was a little challenging though, right? Like what's some of the challenges you ran into when you were working on this?
I didn't like the beams, the little thin beams.
Oh, the support pieces.
Yeah, and I wasn't smart enough to be like, oh, I'll just type it in. So I was just steadying it.
So that is something that a couple people, if you're having trouble getting it to line up perfectly, recognize that you can use those numbers in the channel box, right? Like if you're trying to get this rotated exactly 90 degrees or exactly 180 degrees, you can type that into the rotate, right? If let's say we grabbed this plank here and you're like, let's say it was like this, right? A little too low, and you're like, I want that to line up, and you're trying to get it to line up, and you can't get it to match exactly right. Well, just click on the other plank and see that its translate Y is 2.897, right? Or this one's something different, right? And so I could just copy that, Control C, or I could type it, Control V, and it'll line it up perfectly, right? So there's a little bit of, there's some tips and tricks that you'll learn along the way. Precision is really the hardest thing. What some of you maybe ran into, where you were working at an angle, right, and you were lining this thing up, and you're like, it's perfect, right? And then you tumble around here, and you're like, wait, it's not perfect anymore, right? And so that can be a little bit of a problem too, how you're moving it in 3D space. That's one of the reasons I usually move it one axis at a time. It's a little slower, but it's much more precise. So, you had a question, right, Matt? Oh, that like where you're in the room, yeah. So what were some other? Was that one of the challenges you had? Was that? Yeah, and like that's a little hard to get used to. You'll think it's perfect. You'll be like, awesome, and then you'll tumble around it and be like, oh, that's awesome, right? Like you. Yeah. And it's gonna happen. Um, here's the thing. Like, um, you know what? Is this thing capturing audio? It is. I don't think it's capturing the video yet. Let me go ahead and add that really quick. In case we need the. Yeah, there we go. So, sorry, I wanted to create that, put that little video in the top corner in case I make a significant gesture. I probably won't, but just in case. Okay. Any other issues you ran into? We had a few issues with saving, right? So we're going to talk about that again in a minute. Most of the problems that we have with saving is setting our project. Okay, we got to remember to set the project before we open the file, because otherwise you may be saving files like you may be working over here in this computer and you think you're saving it to your hard drive, but you're really saving it to that computer. And then you go home and you're like, where's my file? I thought I was saving it to my hard drive. It can be problematic. Usually, though, it will be, if you're doing that, then that means it's still on your computer here. It's still on whatever computer you log into, saved in your documents folder. So I can show you how to dig that out, but the best practice is to get into the habit of setting your project. If you were working at home and you forgot to set your project, then it may have set it, or it may have saved it to your computer, and then when you get here, it's hard to dig it back up again, right? So, other issues you had? How many of you are still resistant to moving around the scene? Like you really don't want to move your camera around. You'd rather just park your camera and move stuff from that one camera position. Anybody kind of in that spot now? Because sometimes that will be what causes that issue of I put everything together and then when I tumbled around, it was broken. Kind of get in the habit of, even if you don't feel like you need to, every now and then, just sort of tumble around and look at it from a few angles. And then you can park it again and start putting stuff together. But that will help to alleviate that, like, oops, I broke it thing, right? Okay. I'm going to show you a handful of things today. And I'll be honest, I'm going to go a little faster than we did the other day. Actually, as the semester progresses, I'll get faster and faster in my demos. And that's because, like, you may not always be able to completely follow along, right? The information is more important. Knowing that it's there and knowing that you can dig it back up and do it again is the important part, right? So if for some reason you get lost or whatever, don't feel like you have to follow along completely. You can stop, you can watch, you can take it in, maybe jot down some notes. And then when class is over, you can go back and watch the video and rework it again from there. So the first thing I'm going to do is, even though I have this bridge made here, I want to get it out of my way. Right? Like right now, it's kind of just, it's here. I want to be able to work on some other stuff, and if I create a new object, right? If I go in here and just click this box, right? Like look where I created it. Like that's really inconvenient, right? Like I need it somewhere else, right? I can move it and work on it somewhere else, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to hide this bridge. So some of you may have already discovered this. This button right over here, see over here, it's at the very bottom. This is our outliner. Another way you can find your outliner is if you go to Windows, Outliner. Okay, and this is kind of like the folder structure inside of Maya. And so all of these objects are the objects that are in our scene, right? Click on one here and you'll see. If I click on P-Cube4, we'll see the P-Cube4 is that object under there, right? So I can go in here and select them as well, right? So there's a couple of ways I could do this. One of the simpler ones is that I can grab one of these objects. Let's say I grab this one. It's p cube 15, right? And I hit Control H. When I do that, Control H hides it. I didn't delete it. It's still there. I just can't see it anymore. And you can tell that because over here in p cube 15, it's still there. In fact, I can even still move it while it's hidden, right? But you'll notice the p cube 15 is kind of grayed out. Okay, so Control H hides. How do I bring it back is the part that you'll get stuck on. It's H again, except this time it's Shift H. Okay. Now, I can also select multiple objects in here. Let's say I wanted to just hide everything. I could drag select all of this stuff here. I selected the entire bridge, and I can hit Control H, right? But if I needed to bring that back quickly, that's clunky, right? That's not very efficient. I have to go in here, select them all, and hit Shift H again to bring it back. And like that's just a lot of extra effort, right? Ignore what I'm doing right now. This is some leftovers from a previous class. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to put all of these in a layer, and I'm just going to hide that layer. And that's going to make this a lot easier. So again, over here, outliner. On the opposite side of the screen, we have our channel box. Now, there's a couple of other menus that we could bring up over here, and I'll kind of show those quickly. The channel box, though, we've already seen that it has all these numbers in it, translate, rotates, all that stuff, right? And down at the very bottom is the layers. So where it says display, this is where we're going to create display layers, right? I'll show you before we go to that display layers, though. There's also other tools over here. The video, I'll make sure that my screen isn't blocking it here. There's these buttons across the top. You see these? And right now, the one that's highlighted is the channel box. In fact, if I mouse over it and you look down here at the very bottom of the screen, on this help line right down here, right? This says toggle the channel box layer editor on and off, right? And so if I click that, it disappears and a different menu comes up. If I click it again, it comes back. But you'll see that there's a bunch of menus down the side here, right? And I can also jump back and forth to different menus through that. So the two I want to kind of point out right now is the channel box and the attribute editor. Now the attribute editor has a lot of information about your object too, but it's when you really need to dig deep into that object. It's not just where's the object located and how is it rotated. This is stuff like, I don't want my object to cast shadows, right? This is like, I want my graphics card to render this object differently, right? Or sometimes it's some other, like sometimes our materials for that object, like what color it is and stuff like that, will also be over here in the attribute editor. You'll notice that there's tabs across the top of that. That's because there's a lot of different nodes, we'll put that in air quotes, right, that are going into making that object. So don't worry too much about that yet. Just know that whenever you have an object selected, if you're needing to make changes to it or changes to its attributes, it's either going to be in the channel box or the attribute editor. We're going to steer clear of the attribute editor just for a few minutes. Yeah, you have a question, Mike?
I think I did something, but my menu, like the poly modeling, sculpting, all that stuff, is gone.
Okay.
How do I get it back?
I'll show you. So that's going to happen to you periodically, especially because you can accidentally break these off. Like you can accidentally tear off things from your interface and then close them and be like, wait, how do I get that back? It's under Windows, and then it's under UI elements. So it's user interface elements, and then just put a check next to whatever's broken. So it's probably your shelf. And if you click a little checkbox next to the shelf, did that bring it back?
Yeah, it's at the bottom.
It's at the bottom now. So yeah, you can tear that back off and sort of snap it back up to the top. And you should be able to. So the cool thing about that though is you can actually make custom interfaces. So like when I'm modeling, I need my UI to look completely different than when I'm animating. Because there's just different tools I need, right? So Did that fix it?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions about? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my channel box, right? And I'm going to look at my layers down here. Now, I want to point out there are two different tabs on layers. There's display and anim. Animation layers, don't worry about those yet. Know that they can be pretty neat, though, right? It means that we can do two different animations and kind of blend those together, right? Or I can use an animation layer to change an existing animation, right? Let's say I have a character who's running, right? But I want him to swing his arms bigger. I can just make an animation where his arms go further in each of those frames, and I can turn that on and off, right? So, but right now for display layers, that's what we're going to be thinking about. How many of you have used layers in another software package before? All right. Was it Photoshop, by any chance?
And
Huh?
Sketchbook.
Yeah, Sketchbook, Krita, Paint Tool Sci, all of those have similar layer systems, right? And in all of those 2D animation programs, those layers work differently than they do in Maya, right? Because if you think of it in Photoshop or any of those others, right, if you draw an object on one layer, and then you create another layer above it, and you draw an object on that, it displays it over top of the lower layer, right? That's not what this is about. This is not going to tell us anything about how it is rendered on our screen. It's just going to let us pretty much turn off the visibility or lock it, right? And so sometimes you need to be able to see your object. You just don't want to accidentally keep selecting it. And sometimes you just want to turn the whole thing off and hide the whole thing and not have to worry about it, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to select my entire bridge, just drag select everything, right? And then over here in my display layers, I'm going to click the one that has the circle on it. So it's a circle with a box or like a square. Right. So that's going to create a new layer, and it's going to assign whatever objects I have selected to that layer. Right. Now it doesn't look like anything changed. You'll see we have layer 1 there. But how you can tell it worked is if I click this little V on the end here, that's for visibility. It will allow me to quickly hide or unhide my layer. Something else you're going to see is like later, I'm going to create some new objects. Let's say I create this sphere here, right? And I keep trying to select the sphere, but instead I accidentally select the bridge, right? And that's annoying. But I don't want to hide the bridge. I just want to not be able to select it. So that's what this empty box is on our layer. Right over here, if I click it once, it will sort of make it look like wireframe. Like it's only showing the wireframe of it, and I can't select any of it. So I can still sort of see it as for reference reasons, right? I just can't select it. And if I click that T one more time, it goes to R, and I still can't select it. I can see it as if I could select it. I just can't, right? And those are really handy, right? Because a lot of times, very quickly, your scene is going to start filling up with objects, and you're going to want to be able to group those in ways that you can turn them on and off, or freeze them, or hide them, or whatever, right? So I just did this so I can turn my bridge on and off, because we're going to need it again later, right? So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my visibility on the bridge, right? And we're going to go ahead and start working on a car model, okay? Because we need something to drive across this bridge, right? Now, I want to be clear, right? This is your, like we went from stack a bunch of these boxes together to model like one of the most complex objects that man has ever made, right? We're not going to model a photorealistic like BMW, like all the gloss and like details on the wheels, right? We're going to model a little box car, right? Something very simple, like a little toy looking car, right? This is basically just to teach you some of the basics of modeling. How many of you are liking the modeling part so far, though? You like moving these objects around and stacking them together. You may have had game design class where you had to do a little other modeling, and you're like, I really like the modeling, right? That's awesome. If you're enjoying that, run wild with it. Like, have fun with it. Make it as complex as you want, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but each of these things that we're going to go over is a job, right? Like somewhere out there, somebody right now is getting paid to model cars, and they're getting paid good money for it, right? Somewhere out there, somebody's getting paid to animate cars, and they never have to model anything. And somewhere out there, somebody's getting paid to render those cars, and they never model or animate anything, right? Each of these things is a separate job. And then somewhere out there, there's people who are creating everything. Like they're going from concept all the way to final render, right? Those are usually in smaller studios. So what you should be doing in this class is sort of assessing periodically, did I enjoy that, right? Even if it was hard, that's not necessarily the question. It's going to be hard, right? Did you enjoy doing it? Because if you did, then you're going to practice it more and you're going to get better at it, right? So today is kind of the modeling day, but we're also going to touch a little bit on rigging and animation, okay? We'll talk about what those are here in a bit. So first things first, we're going to make a box. I'm going to make this right now. You just kind of watch during this section, and then we'll make a car together, right? We'll start making our first car together. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a box and a sphere, right? Just so we can see both of these at the same time, right? Now, the thing you'll notice about these is, again, we can grab them and we can move them, right? And I can scale them, right? And I can rotate them. And in its own way, this is modeling, right? We're taking an object and we're changing it around. We can stack a bunch of those together like we did the bridge and create a model, right? But there are some things you can't get just by stacking primitive objects together, right? Like I can only stack so many spheres together, right? But I can never stack enough of them together to make them look like a full, like photorealistic human being, right? It's still just going to look like a bunch of spheres, piled onto each other. Some objects, most objects, are more complicated than these primitive objects. These primitive objects are our starting place, right? And from there, we have to make them more detailed, okay? So what I want to look at is, even though I can move the entire object, each of these objects are made up of sub-objects, okay? So when I select that, we see this wireframe around it, right? We've seen these wireframe images probably all our life in some form or another, right? But we don't always think about what this means, right? For Maya to render this, right, for any engine to render this, it needs to be able to define a surface, right, to define a shape. Right? And so to do that, it uses three objects, or it uses three elements, a vertex, an edge, and a face. Okay. So let's look at vertex first. If I right-click on this, so I can right-click on the object and just hold down that right-click, it's going to pop up a menu. And I'm going to just sort of drag over and highlight the word vertex. And then when I release, you'll see my object is covered with a bunch of little purple dots. Okay? I can grab those purple dots and I can manipulate them. Grab all those, pull them out. Right? And now I've changed this. This is no longer just a sphere. Right? Now it's a sphere with I don't know, like with a growth coming out of it. Right? So all of the things that I can do with the whole object, I can move it, I can rotate it, right? And I can scale it, right? And that's going to allow me to change this object. Yes?
I can't do that. I'm in vertex and it's just elongating up the full object. Look, I've only got this.
Oh.
I've got those selections doing that.
Yeah, so tap B. Okay, and now try. So I'm going to show them that really quick. That's nice. So you're inevitably going to accidentally do this or purposely do this, right? The issue he was having was tapping the letter B, right? So I'm going to grab just a few of these points, right? And if I move them, you'll see I'm only moving those points, right? All of these others stay here. If I hit B, like the letter B is in boy, right? You'll see my object becomes like kind of colorized, and there's like a fall off of this color. And when I move that, it looks like it's moving the whole object, but really it's warping the whole object, right? If what this is called a soft select. It means it's not just editing the thing I have selected, it's editing all of the objects around it too with a fall off. So if I hold down B and keep dragging, you'll see this circle gets smaller. Right? And now when I move that, I can move it a little bit more like this. Okay. Sometimes you want that, sometimes you don't. To turn it on and off, you just tap the B key. Okay. And you can tell whether it's on or off or not, whether your object has this like coloration that goes from like hot to cold. Right. So again, this is just moving these vertices. Now, if you think about a point, right, in like that theoretical way, right, a point in space, I'm defining just a point out here in space. That point has no width, depth, height, anything. It's just an area, or it's just a location that has been defined, right? And that's all really a vertex is. I can't really scale a single vertex, right? But if I connect any two vertices together, what do I get? A line, right? The shortest distance between any 2 points is a straight line. And that's really easy for a computer to define, right? And what we're going to call that in here is an edge, okay? So every vertex is connected to another vertex with an edge. The important thing to remember about edges is they cannot be bent. It's always going to be a straight line, okay? And if I right-click on here, select edge, I can select that edge there, right? And I can drag it, and I can scale it, and I can rotate it, right? Again, I can tap B to get that fall off if I wanted to. And the thing to recognize is all I've really done, if I right-click here and go to vertex mode, is I've just manipulated those two vertices at the same time, right? So it really just depends on what's most beneficial for you and how you're editing, right? There's more than one way of doing that. An interesting thing with edge, this is kind of beneficial if you're in edge mode. So again, to get there, right-click on your object, drag up to edge, right? If I click one edge, bless you. If I click one edge, I can move it around, right? If I hold shift, I can click another edge and another edge, right? But you'll notice that this is kind of made up out of rings, right? It's made up out of like these rings that go around the object. So just try double-clicking on an edge. Watch what happens. It selects that entire ring around it, okay? And that means I can scale that as well, right? And I can start getting some pretty interesting shapes pretty quickly, right? And then the last one is face, okay? So here's how we can think about this. Let's say you were building a fence for an adorable little baby goat, right? And you don't want the little baby goat running out into the street. You got to build a fence for it, right? Because goats are awesome. And all you have is a pile of wood, right? And you don't have very much wood. What is the minimum number of like fence pieces that you would need to enclose that baby goat so it couldn't get away? Think about it. I mean, like, let's say pieces of plywood or whatever, like single pieces. How many do you need to make a fully enclosed area? So if you have 4, right, that build a little box that can't get away. Is that the minimum? Can you make one more economically to house more baby goats? Anybody? Half of you know the answer, you just don't want to say it out loud. Can you do it with 2? Can't really do it with 2. Can you do it with 3? Right, you can build a triangle-shaped house, right? It takes 3 edges to make an enclosed area, right? And that's what we need in order to be able to define a surface, right? It's 3 edges. Once we can define that surface, we call it a face. You'll see that most of the faces on this box, if I right-click and go to face, most of these faces are squares, right? Or quads, means like 4-sided faces, right? But if we go up to the top of this, you'll see that some of these are triangles, right? It's not right in here. These are triangles. It's not really that important to worry about it just yet. But in modeling, it's usually easier to understand what's happening with the model if you used quads, right? You can sort of see the way the edges flow a little bit better with quads because it's going to be an even number, not odd numbers. But the minimum number of faces that you can use is 3. If you have 2, they're just right on top of each other and it just looks like another edge, right? Or it's open and we can't actually see where the other parameter is. So any enclosed group of edges is a face, right? So these are the 3 elements that we can edit. And again, we can grab these faces, right? And we can move them around. But again, like my face is more, my, actual face is more complicated than a sphere, right? I have a nose that grows out of it. There's holes that go up in that nose. My ear gets really crazy, right? Like I can only move these vertices so much before I sort of run out of information, right? So some of the things we're going to need to be able to do is add additional faces or make some of those faces sort of grow out of there into more objects, right? I'll show you this kind of briefly. Every object, when we create it, has this input node right over here. So in our channel box, all the way at the bottom, polysphere 1, right? That is the node that is created when we first create this object. If I duplicate this object and move the duplicate over, right, it doesn't have polysphere 1, right? Because I didn't go to create and make that, or I didn't click over here to make that, right? So at the point at which I created this, it had certain parameters. And some of that was the number of subdivisions in there. Right now it's 20 by 20. And so if I click in here on that 20 and drag down, you'll see I can turn that number up and down. And I can make this simpler. So like I said, edges can't be bent, right? They always are straight. So if you want something to look smoother, you need more edges. If you want something to look jagged, you need fewer edges, right? I mean, you can still do it with a lot of edges in terms of efficiency, right? So let's say this is the object we wanted, or better yet, let's go over here and look at this box, right? This box is just 6 faces, right? If I right click in here and go to face, see that I got these, right? But again, when I created this box, I could have made additional faces. So I'll show you that. If I go to create, polygon primitives, and then cube, there's this little square out here at the end. That means there's some options for this, okay? So if I click on that, I can make it with more subdivisions, right? I could do like 3 by 3 by 3. And then when I hit create, I created a different box, right? When I go to create in the menu, and then polygon primitives, and then under cube, I just click on this little box out to the edge. And then it gives you those options. Right? Sometimes you want to reset that. You can go edit, reset settings, and this is sort of the default, right? But let's say I've already made my object and I want to add those edges again. As long as I haven't edited this, like I haven't extruded anything or moved anything around, I can always go to my inputs here and just turn those subdivisions up here as well, right? I can turn that up to 3, just type those in. I can't really. And then, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, so I have that, right? Now, I want to show you kind of briefly, if I select one of these faces, let's say what I need is I need this other box to be growing up out of the top of this. So I can put another box in there, or I can make this one continue to add more mesh to it. And so if I go to mesh, I'm sorry, I always do this wrong. Edit mesh, extrude. This is something that people use so much, there's a shortcut key for it, Control E for extrude. If I hit extrude, it'll look like nothing changed, but it did. There's actually it duplicated that face, and if I pull up with this this different looking locator, you'll see I just made more mesh grow up out of that, right? Something to recognize, like the way I think of this, they used to have all of those like Play-Doh toys where you'd take the Play-Doh and you'd put it in the thing and you'd mash the thing and it would like squirt out this like weird like star-shaped tube, right? Like that's kind of what's happening. Whatever shape of polygons we have there, we're making it duplicate that face and then we can stretch it up, right? We can also add additional divisions in there with this thing here. So I can click on divisions and add more subdivisions there. I can add like this offset to it, which is going to scale it down a little bit, right? So this is how we can start making more detail in our mesh. Now, inevitably, you're going to be working, right? And you're going to accidentally press some keys you didn't mean to press, okay? So this is a good spot to talk about this. If you hit 1, doesn't seem like anything happened. But basically what we're telling Maya is I want you to show me what these models look like at their like base subdivision level, right? Every face should be perfectly, like that. If I hit 3, it's going to sort of artificially smooth the object I have selected, right? Some render engines will even render it like this, right? And what you'll notice is those edges look like they're curved. In reality, they're still straight. It's just rendering them as they would look if they were curved, right? It's called Smooth Mesh Preview. So you get to see what this would look like if you rounded it off a little bit, right? In between there is 2, and it kind of shows you both at the same time. So what will end up happening is somebody will accidentally hit 3 and freak out because they think they broke the model. Just recognize 3 is smooth, 2 is like that, 1 is like that, for whatever object you have selected. So since we're on the numbers, let's keep going up from there. So we got 1, 2, 3, right? Let's hit 4, see what happens. So 4, 5, 6, and I think 7 show you these different ways of viewing the object. So right now it's just showing it to me in wireframe mode. I just see the wireframes, right? 5 shows it to me in shaded mode, means I see the shading of it, right? 6 is not going to look any different, but if I have a texture applied to this, let's say I downloaded an images, or I went out and I took a picture of some brick, right? And I wrapped it around these objects. If I hit 6, I'll be able to see that brick texture. If I hit 5, I won't, right? And then 7 is going to show me any lighting I have in the scene, right? I usually work in either 5 or 6 just so I can see everything clearly. But I just wanted to show you that because inevitably you'll hit one of those numbers by accident. Usually because you went up to hit W and you missed and you hit 3 and you're like, I broke it, right? You didn't break it. It's okay. Okay. How many of you feel like you're kind of with me? No, I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Shortcut keys. How do you hide an object?
Control H.
Control H. How do you bring it back? Shift H. How do I smooth this object? 3. Huh?
It's not letting me do it.
Do you have the object selected?
Yeah, it won't let it made it wired. Yeah.
So actually, so it's. I think it's doing it. Maybe not. Let's see. Wait. I think it's doing it. I just think it's so detailed that you're not able to. I'm not sure what's happening now. Sometimes when objects are super detailed, it won't let you smooth them because it's like if we smooth that, it's going to make my run slow. So it may be that. Oh, to screw that up. So Control E will do it. Just tap Control E, and now pull up on the arrow. Right below the. You zoom in a little bit. There should be an arrow. On the little blue part, right below the box, a little bit higher. Right, that little stick and slip up. A little bit more, and then click on that, pull up. So if you hit the plus sign, it'll make that thing bigger too. That makes sense. Quick note to show you all this just came up. I thought it was kind of interesting. For some reason, I don't know why Maya does it. Like when I hit W, I get this like these 3 arrows here. If you hit the plus or the minus key, it will change the size of those arrows. And if you hit minus too much, you get this thing here and it's hard to work with, right? And if you hit plus too much, you get this thing and it's hard to work with, right? So sort of find your comfort zone. Mine is about there. Some people like it a little bigger, so it's easier to click on. Some people like it a little smaller, so it's less obtrusive. So just know that that works with your locators as well. All right. Well, we have some knowledge now, so we're dangerous. Let's make some stuff. Okay. I'm going to make a car. All right. I'm going to make a very simple little boxy car using these tools that we just used here. Right. I'm going to make mine relatively quickly. You can kind of tinker around with yours until you get it where you want it to be. Right. I'm gonna give you actually in that YouTube playlist there's some walkthrough videos of this that will make this a little easier for you. So how many of you were able to watch the video or went and watched the video after class? Right? So hopefully that's helpful. Please use those. Like we're putting the effort into making those. I also just have the ones that are pre-recorded that are a little shorter if you want to watch those kind of quickly. Recognize that they're all on YouTube, and YouTube videos can be played at 1.5 speed, or they can be played at half speed, right, depending on how fast you need to go. Yes?
Okay, so I'm trying to delete the objects and I'm trying to delete it.
A second of it? Yeah, so I'll show you real quick. So we got to make sure that if you're in sub-object mode, that you go back to object mode if you need to edit the entire object. So if you're in face mode and you try to delete it, right, and you just grab that and hit delete, it's just going to delete those faces. The object is still what's left of those faces, right? So if I go back to object mode, you'll see that I can still move it around as if it's the whole thing. That's the object that we can delete, right? So make sure you go back to object mode by right-clicking and go to object mode. Whoop. Object mode, right? And then you can delete it, hide it, or move the whole thing around. Okay. So, let's try. This class gets out at 10:15. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so we got about 45 minutes. I think we got enough time to get through some stuff. So let's try this really quickly. How many of you think you could go back to that whiteboard back there and draw a bicycle from memory? Anybody think you could do that? Can I have a volunteer give it a try? Whoever can make it to the whiteboard first, go for it. Let's see what we got. Actually, is there more than one dry erase marker back there?
Yeah.
Okay, how about we team up? Yeah, see if you can draw one too. So yeah, actually, like if as many people can fit back there, like try to draw a bicycle from memory. if you're more than welcome to pull out a sheet of paper and try to doodle one yourself if you want to give it a try. Because if you drag select, it's going to select everything. And usually what I do is say you can select it. Or no, and then hold shift, double click on it. So that's like a random. But that's one of the reasons we kind of keep it as simple as possible until we get a lot of detail with it. So that makes it a little easier to select just a bunch of things. Oh, okay, so we're finishing up the third bicycle up here, kind of looking. Most people usually get a few things right. There's actually studies about this though. Only about 1 in 10 people can get this from memory, right? And more than likely, on your way to class today, you saw somebody drive by on a bicycle, right? But if we just search for bicycle, what most people usually get correct is they're like 2 wheels. Okay, that's the thing, right? Handlebars, that's another part. Pretty sure those handlebars are connected to that front wheel, right? From there, I don't remember, right? I know there's a cog and some pedals, and that's connected to the back wheel. The part that most people can't remember is the frame, right? How does the frame work, right? And if you look at it, it's 2 triangles, right? We got this little front triangle that connects into the handlebars, this back triangle that connects to the rear tire, and then these sort of 2 sticks that go up through it, right? Now, it's not that to be an animator or to be any of this, you have to memorize how every object works. You don't, because there's plenty of pieces of reference out here. The whole point of this is to show you that no matter how much you trust that you know that's how an object should look, you're wrong, right? And going and looking at reference is the only way to learn that, right? But that is probably the one thing I have to like nag students to do more than anything else. I'll be like, well, where's your reference for this? And they'll be like, oh, I'm just doing this one from memory. And I'm like, well, then then you're limited to what is in your imagination, right? And as much as everybody wants to say, like, there's no limit to your imagination. Well, there is if you don't have any information to pull from, right? Imagination still comes from other things. It comes from inspiration, right? So before I even start this car, even though I'm making a little bitty boxy car, I'm going to look at some reference, right? Maybe you want to make a cartoony car, so Google that. Like, see what other people doodled. See what other people like did with concept art, and start using those things to inform the decisions you make, right? It's not less creative, it's actually more creative. It's telling you all of the sources you have to work from, and then how do you use that information to your advantage. So let's just type in car. All right, look at that. Somebody took some pictures of some cars. So the thing I am probably going to want is I want something that shows me the proportions of a car, like whatever kind of car I'm going for, right? But say I'm going to go for a smaller sedan. Strangely, everybody's killing off the sedan now. Like most of the car manufacturers are stopping creating sedans. I read somewhere that Ford is now no longer going to make a sedan, just because nobody's buying them. Nobody wants one, right? And that's cool, whatever. Like, that'll change, or it won't, and whatever. But there's still plenty of them on the road, and that's one of the ones that gives us the most opportunities for this. So I'm going to look for a nice, like, economical sedan, right? And I'm going to kind of look from the side view to give me some ideas of proportions, right? Because if you were to try to draw a car from memory, maybe you wouldn't remember, just like, I know for me, I probably would have made the trunk longer, right? Partially because I came from the 80s, and like Monte Carlo had that trunk that you could, like, fit 12 people in or whatever. Like, this is sort of the proportions I'm going to go for, right? It's got a little bit of a smaller trunk, a little bit of a bigger back seat, a much larger hood, right? Because that's where the engine has to live, right? And so I'm just going to use this mainly for proportions. Also, the thing that you may be not remembering correctly is how tall a car is, right? Like, what's the proportions from the bottom of the car to the hood to the roof, right? It looks like it's about in thirds, right? And so this is information that I need just as I'm modeling mine. Even if I'm modeling a make-believe car, like I'm making my own type of car, right? So I'm going to sort of pull this off to the side just so I have this as a reference, right? And then in Maya, I'm going to go ahead and just create a box. I'm going to look at my bridge just for reference size here first. So I want it to be about the size of a car in relation to this bridge. So I'm going to start with a box, right? And I'll go ahead and scale this to where it's appropriately the right length and height. And make it a little wider, right? So that's about where I'm going for, right? Now, before I do much else, I need to start thinking about the question of why did I choose a box, right? Why didn't I choose a cone, or why didn't I choose a sphere? Could you make one out of a sphere? Cars are pretty rounded, right? You can do whatever you want to. Like, for me, it's what is easiest. What is the most economical in terms of my effort, right? Where can I work smarter instead of harder? Right? And if I make a sphere, there's hundreds of edges that I would have to manipulate to even get it into the right shape, right? I want to start simple. I want to start with the least number of edges, the simplest object I can start with, and the primitive that I can make, because there's no car button, is a box, right? And this gets me part of the way there, right? Maybe just a little wider. Right? Now, the thing I need, though, is I need some more information about what's going to happen for this part of the car right here, like this part that sort of extrudes up, right? And right now, I don't have enough mesh in there to make that happen, right? I can, if I go in here and I grab this face and I start scaling it around, it just warps the rest of the object, right? So I obviously need a little bit more edges in there, right? So I'm going to go back to my P-Cube 2, and I'm going to do, let's say, oh, not that, I'm sorry, the subdivisions. I'm going to do one more in terms of height, okay? I'm going to do, say, two more in terms of depth, right? And then in terms of width, I'll do one. Now, just to kind of show you how these work over here, these numbers, anything in your graph editor, if you click on the number, you can type in the number, or if you click on the number, you see how we get this icon over top of that number? It's like got arrows pointing in each direction. That means if I click and drag, I can crank those numbers up. Sometimes it doesn't crank them up in enough numbers at a time. It's really slow. So if you click out here on the word and middle click drag in your viewport, you can also adjust it that way. And I think I'm going to change my mind. I think I'm going to go 3 wide, 3 deep. I'm sorry, what is this? 1, 2, 3. It's 4 wide, 2 on the height, and 3 on the depth. Now the reason I want to do this is because now I have enough information to start getting some shape out of this car. And this is where I will probably go a little faster than you, and you can always go back and rework this later, right? I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to edges, right? And I can double click this edge and it will select that entire ring all the way around there, right? Yeah, there we go. And that means I can now move that. Like I can move it however I want to, but if I just move it in Z, I can sort of slide it around here, kind of make a smaller trunk, and a little bit of a bigger hood. Right? So that's kind of my area that I can edit now, right? I can still go through here and choose all sorts of different stuff and edit that. Now something that's kind of neat is Maya has an option now for symmetry. Okay, so this object is symmetrical. And if I go up here to symmetry in the top and click this drop down, I can choose which direction I want it to be. So for me, if I choose object X, the way you can tell is if you highlight an edge, you'll see it highlight the other edge as well, right? So that means if I click these two, if I just move this one, it'll move the other one as well. And so I can kind of slowly start to manipulate this object to look a little bit more like a car. I can just sort of get that shape out of here like a car. I'm going to do this with both vertices, edges, and faces, or all three of them, I guess. Again, I can double click that entire edge, scale from the middle, kind of get a little bit of a bulge in there. And you're just starting to see what some of our options are to manipulate this thing. So I don't need a ton of information to start getting a car shape out of here. Right? I can start getting that form pretty easily and pretty efficiently. Back a little bit. Go ahead and scoop my trunk in just a little bit. So I'm getting closer. A question somebody asked me earlier is like, if you're in face mode and you just want to select those two faces and you drag select, is there a way to make it not select the ones on the other side? So let's say we're not in symmetry mode. Let's go back to turning that off, right? And I just wanted to drag select these two on the top. It looks like I got them, but I also got them over here. There's a way of turning that off, but there's also a time when you want that, because sometimes you want to be able to do that and select everything. And if you have it turned off, then you won't. Sort of the trick is to get kind of creative in how you select stuff. If I just want to select those top faces, maybe I sort of drag to the side and select them like that, right? Or I can drag select here, right? And it selects those three. And then I can hold Control and deselect these under here. Right? So there's a whole bunch of creative ways that you can select stuff. And that's just a habit you'll get into as you go. So it's looking more like a car. Still not a car, but it's looking more like a car, right? What I'm needing now is to be able to extrude my roof up, okay? And so we already looked at how that extrude tool worked, right? So let's go in here one more time. I'm going to grab these faces on the top, hold Shift, make sure I'm just selecting those, right? And hit Control E to extrude. Again, that's under Edit Mesh Extrude if you'd rather do it that way, right? And then I can sort of pull this up out of there, and now I have more mesh, right? So I can hit W, E, and R again to start editing it this way. Kind of scale it in here. Scale it in here. Maybe pull out my windshield just a little bit. And again, I'm periodically just kind of checking back on my reference here. I think I kind of made this a little high. Proportionally, it's about a third of it, so it's probably more like that, right? Pull these windows back. Get just a little bit of a bulge on the top. Okay. Now recognize that if I hit 3 on this, it's going to smooth the whole thing. That may or may not be what you want it to look like, right? You may have been modeling it to a completely different, method, and you want something different. So, yes?
Sorry, that modeling menu at the top that you've been using where the symmetry is, I don't have that and I can't find it.
That one should be...
It's not under UI elements.
It should be your status line.
It's clicked, I don't have it.
I bet what's happening is that little arrow is collapsed. So. And if it's not showing that, like these little arrows, here's sometimes will collapse. A little arrow behind, there's a little arrow pointing to the side. It's really tiny. One more. Yeah. Click that, that'll
Probably not done this without the symmetry camera.
no, I mean, if you're being careful with it, you can still. Symmetry is kind of a new tool, so it's not 100% necessary. It's symmetry option. Okay. So tell you what, I'm going to kind of rush through this last part here, okay? Mainly just because we're running a little low on time. So don't worry about keeping up. I just want to show you like 2 things that are relatively important, okay? Yeah, we can do that. We got 20 minutes. So for making wheels, I'm going to go pretty simple. I'm just going to make a cylinder that goes all the way through the car. You can be more detailed if you want to, right? But I'm just going to click this cylinder button, right? And you see it makes this gigantic cylinder. I'm going to go ahead and rotate it. I'll make it 90 degrees, right? And then I want to scale it down. Oops, sorry. Scale it down till it's about the width of the tire, right? And again, I'm using my reference for this. So move it up to the front. And then I'm just doing like this, right? Now, if you want to go more detailed than that, that's cool. But this is about the level of detail I'm prepared to put into it right now. Right? So I'm going to go back to object mode, select them all, sort of move it up a little bit so it's sort of touching the ground. Okay. So I have a car now, right? what I want to talk about, we'll talk about putting different materials on it probably next class period. But recognize that we can create a different material for each of these objects. But I'll sort of show you how to do that later. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to name these so I know what they are. Because if I look over here, like there's tons of like poorly named objects. In all honesty, that's my fault. Usually the new ones you make are going to be down here at the bottom though. And so if I select this object, you see it's P cube 59. I'm just going to rename that by clicking over here in the top and just call this car body, right? And then click here, I'll name this front tires. Click here, I'll name this rear tires, right? Now here's the problem. I can grab all three of these objects to start animating them, and if I move them, right, they're all going to move together. Like, look at that, it's working, yay, right? If I rotate them, everything's going to go haywire, right? And it's also going to be annoying to always animate these tires staying with the car, right? Recognize that there's a job in this whole process called rigging, right? Whenever we hear that word, it usually means setting something up so it will work, right? Like the rigging in a stage play so Spider-Man can swing across the stage or whatever, right? Or Peter Pan. That's what's happening here too. Rigging is like creating a setup that makes it easier for the animator to animate, right? All we're really doing is creating something for the animator to interact with that they don't have to fight with. Animation is really hard by itself. You don't want them having to fight with the things they're animating at the same time. That's a job, is setting up a full character so you can animate that is really complicated. Setting up a really detailed car to where all the shocks work, to where all of that stuff looks realistic, that's complicated, right? And that's a whole job. If you are kind of interested in the scripting part of this, like if you like doing some scripting, if you're kind of okay at math, that is something that is a really sought after position. We're going to do the simplest amount of rigging possible today, right? What we're going to do is I'm going to create something that you cannot see in a render, right? And I'm going to make these objects, I'm going to put them inside of that object, right? It's going to like be like when we make a folder in Maya or in Windows, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go up here to create. I'm going to go NURBS primitives, and I'm going to say circle. Okay? And so that's going to make this circle control here, right? Now, the cool thing about this is if I render this car, well, the lighting is kind of harsh in here, but that circle is not going to show up. Kind of trust me on that one. I'll render it from this side, you can probably see it better. See, you can't see that circle. It's a non-renderable object, which means I can animate that and put all these other things underneath it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and call this car control, right? And so we have it right there, right? So we have the car control, we have the rear tires, the front tires, the car body. Again, if you don't have your outliner open, it's just this button right here. That'll open and close it. Or you can go up to Windows Outliner. So the way we do this is the same way we would do it in Maya or in Windows. Let's say you have a whole bunch of images. You rendered some images, you're going to turn them in. You want to put them in a folder first. You just have to select them and drag them on top of that folder to put them inside of that folder, right? And that is called a parent-child relationship or a hierarchy, right? A hierarchy of control means that there is an object that controls other objects below it, right? And all folder structures are set up like that. So this will work like a folder structure too. The issue is I don't want to accidentally click and drag that, and you'll notice that if I just click in here and drag, it just highlights stuff. So instead of clicking, what I'm going to do is middle click. I'm going to click down on my mouse wheel, and then it'll allow me to drag it up and down, okay? And I'm going to drag it on top of car control. And when I do that, you'll see now car control has a little plus sign on there. And if I click that, you'll see that rear tires are under car control. So I can just grab that ring and move it, and the tires will go with me. And if I rotate that ring, that will go with me as well, right? So I'm going to do that with all three of the body parts. I'm going to drag front tires onto car control. I'm going to drag car body onto car control. And you'll notice now that if I just move this object, the car goes with it, okay? That's a very simple way of rigging. The other thing that's kind of neat is if I wanted to turn my wheels, I can still do that and then animate the entire thing, and it kind of goes with it as well, right? That's a very simple way of turning the wheels, but you get the idea. Now, the thing you have to be careful is that you only move the car control. You do not have to do this to move it, because if I did that, what I did is I grabbed not only car control, but all of the objects underneath car control, right? And so that means if I rotate it, I'm still going to get something crazy, okay? So one of the ways you can prevent yourself from doing that is putting all of the car models in a layer and locking that, right? So what I'll do is sort of from above, drag select just the models, not the control, and I'll add that to a layer as well. Just to be clean, I'm going to go ahead and name these. This is going to be bridge layer, and this is going to be car layer. And I'm going to go ahead and lock the car so I can't accidentally control or select it. So you see that it's not selected there, right? So we'll look at how we're going to texture these later, right? Or how we're going to material these later. But right now, I want to very quickly, because we've got about 15 minutes left, I'm going to show you how to animate your first object. Okay, this is the point I wanted to get to so we could talk about animating. I'm not going to start on this car. I'm going to kind of sort of go off to the side and show you on an object, like a different object, a sphere or something like that, right? Because the first time through, this is a little confusing. Okay, so Control H. I'm going to go ahead and create a box here. No, let's do a sphere. Sorry, a sphere. Scale it up where we can see it, and I'm going to move over to here, right? And I'm going to put these numbers at something that make more sense. No, 5. Right. So you'll notice I'm on frame 1. If I click down here, I can manipulate my timeline to be on different frames, but go ahead and put it on frame 1. And I just have an object over here, and its location right now is translate Y 5. That's how high up it is. I moved it up 5 units, right? And its location in that direction, translate Z, is 25, right? So, what this is, I've told Maya, put it there, right? However, I don't always want it to be there, right? So how we're going to control that is with something called a keyframe, okay? A keyframe is a marker in time on those values. Okay. So I'm going to just select this object again, right? And while I'm on frame 1, I'm going to hit S, okay? S is for set keyframe. You'd think it'd be K or something like that. S to set a keyframe, okay? So if I hit S, I want you to watch what happens, both on my timeline and in my channel box. So we got some red in there, and this is good red. So over here on my timeline, I have a little red tick mark, right? And over here in my channel box, all of my channels turned red, okay? That's how we know that there's a keyframe on that value on that frame. If I move to a different frame, right? Frame 10, my object stays in the same place, but you'll notice that there's no tick mark on my timeline there, like there is over here, and the numbers in my channel box are now pink. Pink means it's animated, there's just not currently a keyframe on that exact location. Okay, so I'm going to drag this all the way out to the end of my timeline here, 120, okay, and I'm going to move my object. Okay, so I'm going to move my object all the way to the other side here. In fact, I'm going to move it to negative 25 instead of 25. Right? So I've moved it 50 units in that direction. Okay? So I've put it in a different place, but I put a marker in time that said, whenever in question, Maya, if you're on frame 1, set it to these values, 5 and 25. And I'm giving it some conflicting information. I changed that to negative 25, right? So if I scrub my timeline, Maya's just going to snap it back to the last place it knew it was supposed to be, right? Which was where it was on frame 1. However, if I change that back to negative 25, right? And then I hit S again, I'm giving it a new marker. Right? I'm saying now on frame 120, I want you to be over there. So I hit S again. So you see I get another keyframe, it goes red again. And now if I move my timeline, it doesn't snap back. Right? In fact, if I sort of scrub, you'll see it transitions. Right? Maya figures out, I've told it to be here on frame 1, I've told it to be there on frame 120. Maya says, there's another 118 frames you haven't told me about. I'll just try to figure those out for you. Okay? So Maya's going to take a guess at where I want that to be. Right? So if I hit play now, right here, it's going to play it back. Now, here's the thing that's a little frustrating. That's not 120 frames a second, right? Or that's not 120 frames. Maya should be playing this back at 24 frames a second. But what Maya's going to do is play it as fast as it can, right? It's going to try to make sure that it can play every frame. And since this is a simple scene, it's able to play that faster than 24 frames a second. If I right-click on my timeline and go to playback speed and set this to real time, okay, so right now it was set at every frame free. I'm just going to set it to real time, right? And hit play. We'll see that that's our animation now. That's this object moving from one side to the other. Now, let's say there was something in its way. Let's just do a rough obstacle for this thing, right? Let's do something like that. Right. As it is right now, it's crashing right through that thing, right? So let's say I wanted it to go over it, right? I didn't want it to go through it. I wanted it to go over it. How do I fix that? So I can add more keyframes. I can add more markers and time. I can say, well, right here in the middle on frame 60, I don't want it to be inside of that object. I want it to be above that object. So I can hit W. I can, have the wrong object selected. Sorry. Go to frame 60. I can hit W, and I can move that up in the air. Right? Now, again, we have to remember to hit S. But sometimes I forget to hit S, right? And I'll work all this time to get my object in exactly the right spot, and I'll go scrub my timeline, and it messes up, right? So there's also this button right over here. It's like this little, it's in the bottom corner underneath the play button. It's like a circle of arrows, like it's two arrows that kind of circle around each other. You can see it right here. So if we click that, that's auto key. That means if I change a value, Maya's going to automatically set a keyframe for me. So if I raise that up in the air, you'll see my translate Y got a keyframe, right? Now the rest of them didn't. So just to be safe, I still like to hit S. But now what I get when I hit play is this object going over this object. We're going to explore this in much more detail, but really I just wanted to show you that process. You put your object where you want it to start. You hit S to create a keyframe. Put your object where you want it to end. You hit S, you move your timeline, you hit S to set another keyframe, and then you just set as many keyframes as you need to get it to go where you want it to go. Now, occasionally you need to delete a keyframe, or you need to scale some stuff, or you need to copy a keyframe. If I click here and just right-click, you'll see I have cut, copy, delete, and then there's a couple of other options. We'll talk about those later, but if there's a keyframe on that frame, that's how you fix that, right? So let's quickly bring back our bridge and our car. Right. And I'm going to go ahead and move my car to the beginning of our bridge over here, right? Lower it down, make sure it's touching the bridge. So you kind of have to be careful there. My ring is kind of inside of the bridge, but that's okay. I'm going to go to frame 1, and I'm going to hit S. Right? I'm going to go to frame 120. I'm going to move my car all the way to the other side of the bridge. Actually, let me undo that. The car needs to be over just a little bit. Wait, that's the wrong side of the road. There we go. S. People shouldn't let me drive. Move it all the way to the other side of the bridge on frame 120. Hit S again. And what we have now... Wait, what just happened? Oh, really? That's hilarious. So this is interesting. Maya has a bug, and of course I just got that bug, which is sometimes when I set these keyframes it doesn't seem to react, right? So I'm going to go ahead and save this really quick. All you have to do is, I'm going to save it on my desktop. Close Maya and reopen it, and it will work. I know we're nipping at the heels of time for class to be over. I just wanted to show you. So now when I hit play, S. There we go. So now my car is driving across the bridge. Okay? Question? All right. So, I know we barely got that in under the radar, and I know I threw a lot of stuff at you really quick. That's why I record these, so you can go back and kind of watch them and keep up. I wanted to get to this point because, again, we have next class period is Friday, right? Which is work time. And then you got the weekend. So I wanted to make sure you had some stuff to work on. So let's go ahead and look at exercise 2 really quick. And that's what I want you to be tinkering with. This should be up on the network, or up on D2L. Right? But it's pretty simple. So ETSU classes. This is where I house all of those documents. POA. And so our exercises are right here. Right? And so if we go here, EX2 cars, create your own simple car model and animate it driving across the bridge. Then create 2 alternate cars and have them driving across the bridge differently than the first car. They can be faster, slower, different direction, or veering from side to side. Inevitably, some of you are going to have them going off the bridge. Some of you have them jump stuff. Have fun with this, right? This is your chance to make some stuff move, right? And we got a pretty decent chunk of time to be doing that. It will be due on Monday. So that will be the 10th, right? So it is due at the beginning of class on Monday, September 10th. Now, I want to show you really quick on what you're going to turn in. You're going to turn in a play blast of this animation. What does that even mean? Right? Play blast is an invented word that Maya made. It's basically an animation preview, so we don't have to worry about rendering and all that time. What we're going to do is right-click on our timeline and go to Play Blast, choose this options box, and we got to change a few things, and luckily I'm recording this so you'll be able to see it. I'm going to change AVI to QT, that's QuickTime. Right? I'm going to change encoding to H.264. I'm going to go ahead and turn my quality all the way up and my scale all the way up. And the biggest thing is I want to say save file. Right? And so it's going to put it somewhere. It should put it in your movies directory of your project. You already have your bridge project. Make sure you set your project, and it'll just put it there. I haven't set my project yet, so I'll just tell it to put it on my desktop, and we'll call it Cars. Right? When I hit this Play Blast button, it's going to play through it really quickly. Right? And then decline, because it's trying to open it up in iTunes. I can open with Windows Media Player. Oh, goodness. Finish. So now I have a video of that. Okay? So go back and watch this video again for those settings, but that's what we're going to be turning in. If you're in here on Friday, I can walk you through a lot of that stuff again. So I'll be here on Friday morning working with you. It's 10:14, so 1 minute early. Class dismissed. I'll talk to you soon.